it seems that Kemba and the Celtics are looking to break up due to the inability of Kemba's consistency. He seems to be not only a defensive liability, but he's also a health liability. He cannot stay on the court. He has missed a significant amount of games both last season and this season. And it seems that, that him and the Celtics just aren't working out. I mean, when he came to Boston, it was with the intent that it was going to be the Kemba and Tatum show, or at least, Kemba Tatum and Jaylen Brown show, but it seems that he has fallen to maybe even a fourth option depending on the night. So, Kyle, what I'm going to ask you is, first and foremost, it's a two-part question. Do you think that he has a chance of staying in Boston? And if so, Kemba Walker's contract is quite large, so this would mean it's an automatic trade. Who in the hell is willing to absorb the contract of a 30-year-old point guard who is a legitimate liability on the defensive end and who is nowhere near the prime in which he was back in Charlotte?
Well, first things first, I don't think he's going to stay in Boston. I think his days in Boston are over with. And one thing before I get to my second point, I hate the language that they're saying that this is a quote unquote breakup. Like, these are grown adults. Just say that they are basically looking to mutually part ways. That's a lot better than saying a quote unquote a breakup. Like, this is a freaking high school relationship coming to an end. Like, that's my little soapbox moment. It's just like, come on, like.
But you're right.
This is
the narration behind it is stupid.
It's just, when it comes to the freaking framing of these reports, like a breakup, no, they're making a business decision, and more than likely they're going to mutually part ways, and that's it. I'm just looking across the league. It's kind of tough for Kemba, just because he's a 30-year-old point guard, like you mentioned, and he's a major defensive liability. So I still do believe that Kemba is a starter in this league, but I think his days as a starter are numbered. And I think at some point in time, I don't think it's going to be this offseason, but I think sooner rather than later, I think Kemba is going to have to really start considering coming off the bench, just because I don't think teams want to pay this much for a guy who's really one-dimensional and is not the number one guy on the team. I mean, on most teams, Kemba is probably going to be at most the two, like the second best player of the team. But on most teams, he's probably going to be the third. So, if you look across the league, could the Lakers go after him just because they're probably looking to part ways with Dennis Schroeder after his abysmal playoff performance in the first round against the Suns? Could the Knicks go after him? I mean, maybe they could, simply just because they kind of had some issues at the point guard position. They were kind of flipping back and forth between Derrick Rose and Elfrid Payton. I don't really know. The Knicks could potentially pursue him. It's just, you have to understand, Kemba's great offensively, but you're going to have to cover for him on the defensive side. And I think Boston did pretty much as best as they could to limit the defensive exposure that he brings to a team. But I think Kemba's spots of going to another team are going to be pretty limited. And with the contract hit that the team's going to have to take, I don't know if the market's going to be freaking on fire for Kemba Walker. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, again, with him being my favorite player to watch a lot of games whenever I can when he's healthy, it does hurt to see that he is kind of hitting that point in his career where it's injuries, and then when he is on the court, he's not doing phenomenal. But I do have his stats up here for the last two seasons. They're not as bad as I thought. In his first year in Boston, he averaged 20 points per game. It's not bad. I mean, granted, it's not anywhere what he used to be in the 2 years prior of him going with 25 and then 22 and then 23 the year prior to that. Kemba kind of got better as his career progressed. But again, people don't understand that's because of the inflation of him being the actual literal fucking only option in Charlotte, whether he was a Bobcat or a Hornet. He didn't have to worry about passing. He didn't have to worry about giving it up to someone else in a clutch moment. Kemba took all the shots, and rightfully so, because he was Kemba Walker. He was the best player on the team. But when you came to Boston, which is what didn't make sense, again, he wanted to come to a winning culture. But when you have 3 additional mouths to feed without including yourself, where do you see yourself kind of dominating or, matching up well against somebody because you had Jason Tatum in his first year, Jaylen Brown, and Gordon Hayward. Where was Kemba going to go? Where in that trio did Kemba think he was going to dominate? Pick and roll, maybe. Fast break, maybe. You know what I'm saying? Like a switch, maybe a mismatch of some sort. But he can't go one-on-one with every player. He can't dominate like Jason Tatum can. He can't hit shots like Jason can. He can't play defense and score efficiently like Jaylen can. He doesn't have the offensive skill set that Gordon Hayward does with his height and his vertical. So you're sitting here and you look at it and you're like, well, he did fill that IT void. Isaiah Thomas did it and Isaiah Thomas dominated. Yeah, but IT didn't have all of those mouths to feed at the time. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
IT was the guy. Granted, he had Marcus Smart, he had Al Horford and
Kelly
those boys.
Olynyk.
So he had bigs around him and solid role players. But
I think even Drake Crowder was on that team at one point.
exactly, you know what I'm saying? They had good role players, but in this case, like you had mentioned, Kemba is pretty much the third option at this point. He only played 43 games out of 72. I think he played maybe one or two postseason games in this series against the Nets, and I just don't think it's going to work out. I never thought it was going to work out in Boston, especially when he chose Boston over the Mavericks. And then obviously looking back at it, I don't think he would have worked in Dallas either because Luka is a dominant, ball dominant player, and we'll get into Luka in a second. But I agree with Kyle. It's really hard to kind of sit here and look and figure out where he's going to go unless it's maybe a bench role or if he's willing to restructure his contract because nobody wants to pay upwards of $31 million a year for someone who's basically a guaranteed bucket on the other end, and you don't even know if he's going to play half the year, especially with the knee injuries he's been having consistently over the last two seasons.